And Shane and Danielle cleaned up this morning after us, so thank you for that. Caleb was also here, and my brother Cree, and some other, pardon? And Sean, yes, and Sean. We're a little bit sad today, too. Our longtime friends, Maurice McCarthy and Lissa, some of you who have been here a long time remember Maurice. He's a very brash New York City type preacher. Well, his wife passed yesterday as well. And I knew that she was sick about a month ago. I talked to him, and he said that she had been diagnosed. He told me what it was, but I don't know. I don't remember. It was some odd thing. And they told them at that time that there was no hope, and that they could, if they could give some chemo, they could stretch her life out a month. And they decided that was not what they were going to do. And she passed yesterday. I heard a couple of days before that she was really on her way to meet with Jesus. These were the kind of people that we trusted our kids with. We were very particular on who we let our kids go stay with, and they had kids, our kids' age too, and so we're pretty sad about that. One day, they came over to our house, which is Daisy's house now, and they were little, and there was a whole lot of fighting going on upstairs, and so I went up there to find out what was going on, and their son had bit Amos on the back or somewhere, and so I couldn't help it. I walloped him, and then there was more screaming upstairs, and I came down the stairs, and Marie said, "What did you do? Did you spank everybody?" And I said, "No, I just spanked your kid." And the next time they came over, the little boy came through the door, and I pointed at him. I said, "Don't forget whose house you're in here." And we never had any more problem after that. But they're great friends, and I got to think about maybe going out there. I don't know what they're doing yet, but so anyway, we're sad about Crystal's mom, and we're sad about Lissa McCarthy, and a lot of people are sick and stuff like that. So keep everybody in prayer. All right. Now today I want to talk to you about the real Jesus, the one from the Bible. Jesus was an unauthorized minister. He had no formal education. He had no degree. He had not been to seminary. They had seminaries. The School of Gamaliel was the seminary that the Apostle Paul went to. Jesus didn't have that. He was self-taught, and he was probably, without a doubt, the most conversant in the Bible of Old Testament history and Old Testament law and how it should be interpreted. And he was a kind of guy who was not afraid to point out when people were doing wrong. Somehow, if we turn the Christian radio on, we hear a story of a Jesus that is not the Jesus of the Bible. Jesus was a very hard-nosed guy, and he was not afraid to take on authority. He was not afraid to point out sin. And as Jesus is coming, we talked, for those of you who may not have been here last week, we talked about the Palm Sunday event and coming into Jerusalem and the things that happened around that. So at this point in our story, it is just before the Last Supper, and it's just before the cross, and it's just before Easter. And as he comes into Jerusalem, he spends some time in the temple. And so I just wanted to kind of start out with that. Now, I want to say something about the temple. How many churches do you think were in Cheshire area? You know, you might not know this, but there were at least 4 or 5. There was one up on Knott Road. If you turn on this way and go to the top of the hill, there's a house across the way, and the Methodist Church was there. And you know where up here where they've replaced the foundation on the barn and there's a big pond there? That's where the Baptist Church was. And then the Free Will Baptist Church was in the little schoolhouse, which is the second place up Benell Road. And there were some other churches here. There was another Methodist church. Where are they? Yeah, the Academy Church. They're all gone. And so when we talk about the temple, we have to understand that over the history of the temple, because the message is about Jesus in the temple, the history of the temple is this. Moses had this tabernacle, and it had all of the things in it. It had the 7-branch lampstand, the incense altar, the big wash stand to go in, and the whole burnt offering altar. And they used that, they would set it up and they would take it down in places where they would go. And after the children of Israel went into the promised land, David decided he wanted to build a temple, and he was not able to do it because God said no. But his son built the temple, and it was finished in 957 BC. We got that up there? Yeah, we do. Good. There was 2 invasions by the Babylonians in 597 and 586. In 597, they came down and they stripped the temple out of all its gold. And in 586 BC, the Babylonians came and they destroyed the temple that Solomon built. The children of Israel went into exile for the 70 years. And after the 70 years were over, Ezra, there's a book of Ezra which talks about this in the Old Testament. He came and he rebuilt the temple in 515 BC. Now, King Herod the Great expanded the temple just before the time of Jesus. He expanded the building. He began in 37 BC, and it was finished in 4 AD. And then in 70, Titus, who was the Roman emperor, came and destroyed the temple in 70 AD. And the Muslims built the Mosque of Omar on the site in 691. So we're talking about, except for the tabernacle, which was the first one that moved around, we're talking about 4 different temples and then the Mosque of Omar on the very same site. And so you need to understand that the temple that Jesus went into was the one that Herod expanded. Like one day, Jesus said, "Tear down this temple and I will rebuild it in 3 days." And they said, "Are you nuts? Herod's been building this all these years." But he was talking about his body, the temple that he lived in. So I just want to put that out as a general understanding before we begin. So when Jesus came to the temple, he did not see the Mosque of Omar. It was not there. And the Muslims have had a thing over the years. I don't know if you're aware of this, but all of the Middle East, which is Islamic today, was initially Christian. And the Eastern Church lost influence, and the Muslims came in and they tore the tops off of the churches and they put minarets on them and they turned them into mosques. The city of Istanbul was initially called Constantinople, and it was the head of the Eastern Church, the Eastern Christians. And you know what the difference between the Eastern or the Orthodox Christians are and the Western Catholic Christians are? 3 words. Initially, this is not in the sermon, but I'm going to tell you about this anyway because it's interesting. Initially, the churches had an agreement wherever they were that when they came together and they would discuss what doctrine would be, they would not change anything except it be in the Bible, and that everybody agreed that that's what the Bible said. And so for years and years and years, the groups of people that came together, the Eastern Church, the Greek Orthodox Church, and the Roman Catholic Church, they agreed on everything up to a point about the year 1000. And in the year around the year 1000, the Western Church, the Catholic Church, decided to add 3 words. And you know what those were? Do you know what they are? It's called the Filioque clause. And initially, the creed read, "The Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father." And the Western Church said, "and the Son." That's what divided them. The Eastern Church said, "We never agreed to that, and it's not biblical." Because the scriptures do clearly say the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father, and it doesn't mention the Son. But the Roman Catholics wanted to get the Trinity in there, and so they added those three words, and that's what split the two churches. Totally off the point, but, I went with it. So, Jesus comes near the temple, and he weeps over the city. Now, we know that Jesus was in the temple basically every year from the time he was 12 until the time they think he was about 30 years old when he began preaching, so maybe 33 years. So about, for over 20 years, Jesus went to the temple 3 times a year because the law said 3 times a year you shall appear before the Lord. We know that Jesus was a law obeyer. And so we know that he went for Passover time every year and Pentecost time and Tabernacles time, which we've talked about those 3 feasts in the time past. And so when he was 12, when he was bar mitzvahed, he decided to stay in the temple, and he didn't tell his parents because they told him that now that you're 12 years old, you're a man and you can make your own decisions. And so when everybody went back to Galilee, Jesus, hey, I'm making my own decisions now, so I'm going to stay in the temple. And it says they didn't find him for 3 days, which tells me that they didn't have to worry about what Jesus was doing, because if they didn't notice he was missing for 3 days going back, but then all of a sudden they find out he's not with the caravan, they go back to Jerusalem. He's sitting in the temple among the teachers, doing what? Listening and asking questions. If you want to learn, you have to do those 2 things. And he's there at least 3 times. It's 1 week event down there, so he's spending 3 weeks a year for those 20 years before he gets into ministry, and he's listening and he's learning and he's reading the scriptures, and he comes to a place when he's an adult where he understands what the scriptures mean. He knows enough how to correct improper teaching, and he's not afraid to do it. So at this point, late in his life, he comes and he says to Jerusalem, "If you had only recognized the day that things make for peace, it's hidden for you." Now I want to just mention this. This is a play on words, what we call a pun. You say, well, how is this a pun? It has to do with the name of Jerusalem. Does anybody know what Jerusalem means? Well, we got this Hebrew word shalom. That's the second part of the word. Shalom means health, wellness, prosperity, everything good in life. The name of the city means teaching of peace. How many of you would like to have peace in your life consistently, day in and day out? I mean, this is the goal in life, isn't it? We want to be at peace. We don't want to be fighting with people. We don't want to have angst over situations. And the city of peace, the city that teaches peace, according to Jesus, was he saying when he's crying over the city of peace has no peace. And the city of peace doesn't even understand what makes for peace. Because Jesus is said to be the Prince of Peace. That's one of the names that's listed in Isaiah chapter 7 for the name of the Messiah. So there's irony in this. It's the third definition of irony is incongruity between what might be expected and what actually occurs. And the city of Jerusalem has been a city that has been fought over throughout recorded history. You know, the story of King David. He conquers the whole land, but he can't conquer Jerusalem. which was called Jebus in those days. It's the center of the world, biblically speaking. What was the big deal a few years ago when Donald Trump made Jerusalem, he recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and he moved all of our diplomats to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv? Everybody went crazy. The Muslims went crazy. How dare you do that? You're recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and you're disregarding all of the Arab people that live there. Well, there has never been peace there. Titus was about to come and destroy Jerusalem. The Jews were thinking, the disciples were thinking, I want to sit on your right hand and on your left in your kingdom. They're thinking that Jesus is coming into Jerusalem to become coronated king, and he is going to get rid of the Roman oppression, and we're going to be pretty important people because we've been with him all along, and he has to give us these offices because he's about to become the king of Israel. And Jesus said, that's not how the kingdom of God works. Are you able to undergo the baptism that I'm about to undergo, he asks. Well, what kind of baptism is that? It's a baptism of suffering and death. And they said, oh yeah, we're able, because they're not thinking that's what it is. They don't really understand, even though Jesus has told them at least 5 times as he's coming down through from Galilee, what he's about to do is to give his life. And he looks at the city and he says, I wanted to gather you. It says in Matthew, I wanted to gather you like a hen gathers her chicks, but you were unwilling. Therefore, your house will be left to you desolate. Have you ever seen this Arch of Titus? Has anybody ever been to Rome? Have you seen the Arch of Titus? This depicts, I don't know if you can see it very well. It's pretty bright out. But let's see here. I can't even see it at all. Let me look on here where it is. Okay. Right here is the menorah, the 7-branched lampstand. This is a victory march as Rome came marching back into the city of Rome after their conquest of Judea in the year 70, and they have on their backs the gold from the incense altar and the lampstand and all of the things that they've pillaged from the temple of God. And Jesus is saying, if you had known what makes for peace, this would not have been necessary. But there was a rejection there. And I'll show you here from the Bible that it was not a rejection by the Jews as a whole, which is, that idea that's falsely been used to persecute Jews for centuries. But it was a rejection of the leadership of the temple. There's a difference between the leadership of a spiritual organization and the people who show up. And a lot of times, it's corrupt. People say, well, did you hear so-and-so say this on the Christian radio? And my answer is always the same. I don't listen to Christian radio. It drives me crazy to hear the things that people are saying are biblical and they're not. They're just opinions that are being... Now, I'm not saying everybody, but there are so many false teachers out there, everywhere. And people will say to me, well, what do you think about this? So-and-so said this. Well, that's not biblical. Then I'm the one that's wrong, because they heard it on the radio and they know, or they saw it on the internet, and so they know, therefore, that it's correct. So Jesus says the days will come when your enemies will set up ramparts. Well, how did this happen? Read some history. The false prophets and the false messiahs said, we don't have to pay taxes to Rome anymore, and we're going to rebel. And the Romans said, no, you are a vassal state of Rome, and you will obey, and you will pay your taxes. And they said, no, we won't. And they said, yes, you will. And so they sent Titus, and he, like the Babylonians before, he put up a barricade around the city, and he starved them out. And the people had a good idea. They said, okay, well, I'm going to go and surrender. And then they would take the few pieces of gold that they had, and they would swallow them. And they go out, I surrender. And they say, okay, come over here. And they take a knife, and they cut them open and take the gold out of their stomach. That's what happened. They rebelled. The thing that they wanted Jesus to do is the thing that the false prophets did, and it brought the destruction of Rome upon Jerusalem. Well, you know, Rome wasn't the center of Christianity in those days. Rome was the center of Nero and Caligula and these wicked Diocletian and these wicked emperors. So Jesus said, the days will come when your enemies will set up ramparts. They will crush you to the ground, you and your children within you. They will not leave within you one stone upon another, because you did not recognize the time of your visitation. This is the teaching of Jesus. This is not your mealy-mouthed little Jesus who doesn't care what anybody does. He does care about false religion and people being religious for profit, because we're to see that's mainly what this is about. It's always about the money when you think about it. And he's saying, you want somebody to come in and be your king and overthrow Rome, and because that's what you want and that's what you're thinking of, you're going to reject me because I came riding lowly on an ass, and I don't strike anybody back, and I tell people to love one another, and I tell people to be humble. That's not what you're looking for. You're looking for somebody to rebel against Rome, and because of that, it's going to cause your destruction. It's a very stern warning. And so then, he entered into the temple and began to drive out those who were selling things in there. Religion selling stuff? What a novel idea. You know, back in the day, Mom, she got her information from Oral Roberts and Jimmy Swaggart and Jimmy Baker. And you could, for, I don't know how much it was, you could send a certain amount of money, and they would send you a cloth that they prayed over, and then you could lay that cloth on the sick person, and they would be healed for a certain amount. I forgot what it was at the time, different dollars than today. Or you could buy a cross from them. It was a special cross that particular great man of God held in his hand and prayed for you before it was sent out. Money. What were they selling in there? When I was in India, we went to the Hindu temple, and if you wanted to worship at the Hindu temple, you had to take the priest, the Brahmin priest, up at the top. If you wanted his blessing, you would have to take him a coconut. But you couldn't take an ordinary coconut. You had to take a coconut that you bought from the merchant at the base of the stairway, because all these things are up huge hills. And you had to buy that special coconut. Your coconut from your backyard, forget it. Has to be a special coconut. The Jews had a similar idea there, and I shouldn't say the Jews, I should say the leadership of the Jews had a similar idea as well. Let's see what we got here. You ever seen one of these, Matt? Yeah, $1. Notice the difference in that dollar. Notice, first of all, on the top, you see it says silver certificate. And under the $1, it says $1 is in silver payable to the bearer on demand. And the date on it is what? Yours is 1957. This one says 1953. I have 3 of them here. One of them's in pretty good shape. $1's worth of silver today is over $21. If you have a silver dollar, there's $21 worth of silver, because they said, okay, we know how to fleece the American people. We'll start printing paper money, and then every year we'll just print some more. And this is totally off the subject of the sermon, but it's good preaching anyway. And so they had this idea. Now, this is a very, very dirty bill. You can tell that that's been around everywhere. So probably, $1 was, well, when I started working, let's just put it this way. When I started working at the farm when I was 14 years old, I made $1.20 an hour. So I would work all day for about $9. So they're different dollars. When I went to college in 1976, I went all the way through college, including room and board, for $10,000. So they're different dollars. That's not the point here. The point is, this dollar was probably spent on drugs. It probably went through the hands of a hooker. It probably was stolen from somebody. It was probably cheated by somebody to get it. It was probably used to bribe somebody. It's passed all around, and it's all worn out, and it's been everywhere. Now, there's some good things that probably happened. Somebody probably dropped it in the collection plate at some point. Somebody probably gave it to somebody that was in need at some point. But what they were saying is, it's dirty money. And therefore, you can't give this at the temple. Bring your dirty money. Bring your $3 of dirty money, and we'll give you 2 clean temple monies. Because we know that this has never been used for anything except in the worship of God, and so bring your crap money, and we will exchange it for good money. That's what they were doing. Jesus wasn't having it. Now, the problem with the analogy is that these dollars are not good money, but it was done in silver in those days. So they would bring 3 silver coins or something like that. I don't know what the exact exchange rate was, but it says he entered the temple and began to drive out. It says in John, he made a scourge, which is a piece of wood with leather on it with several straps, and he came in and started beating these people that were doing this, that were selling drugs. Now, this is not the Jesus that you hear about on the radio. The Jesus on the radio doesn't care what people do. You just have to love everybody. I'll tell you, there's a special place in hell. Is that clock right? Holy cow. I'm just getting started here. He drove them out. You can't bring your own sheep. Your sheep probably has a blemish. We have good sheep here, so you have to buy our sheep if you want to make the sacrifice that's necessary. You have to buy our dove. They had cash register in there. He came in and turned the tables over, and money flew all over. You want to know why they wanted to put him to death? This is why. This is why. Because he came in and he challenged them right to their face. He turned over what they were doing. It was their livelihood. I can't believe it. What did we do that took so long to get this thing started? I digressed. Okay. All right. I'm sorry I digressed, but I'm still going to preach the rest of this sermon. He said, "It is written, my house shall be a house of prayer." That's directly out of Isaiah 56, verse 7, about 700 BC. It says, "I will bring them to my holy mountain. I will make them joyful in my house of prayer, and their burnt offerings and their sacrifices shall be accepted on my altar. My house shall be called a house of prayer for all people." I don't know if this means that they were to come and to pray in the house of God for all people, or if all people should come to the house of God. They interpreted it that way because they put the court of the Gentiles around so that all people could come and be a part of the place where God lives, the house of God in the center of the world, where the law of God is true and the true God who created us could come. And Jesus said, "You have perverted it." Jesus said history will repeat itself. Jeremiah, this is a story of the destruction of the first temple. "Will you steal, murder, commit adultery, swear falsely, make offerings to Baal, go after other gods, and then come here and stand? Oh, we're safe. We're in the house of God. You do all these things? Has the house which is called by my name become a den of robbers?" You see, where Jesus got these things, he was reading this thing and he's saying, okay, I know what happened before, and I saw how this happened before. The people of God started doing all kinds of bad things and thinking that if they just would bring their sacrifice and if they just come to the house of God, God was going to be okay with everything they do. And it wasn't so then, and it's not so now. So he's looking at history. And a lot of what Jesus says about the end times, he's looking at history. And you'll see this he's looking back in the past, he's saying this is the way it is and this is what's going to happen as a result of it. So, here's the good part. Every day, he was teaching in the temple. Now, this 7-day Holy Week is something that's been imposed upon the story. You know, the 7-day Holy Week is if you're in the church and they want to teach you about everything that happened in Holy Week from Palm Sunday to the crucifixion to the resurrection, they had to get it in 1 week, and it probably was more than that. Because we see Jesus here every day in the temple teaching. And the chief priests and the scribes and the leaders, they don't like it. He's upsetting the homeostasis. You know what the homeostasis is? Everything needs to stay smooth and going just the way it's always gone because the right money is coming in at the right time, and we're all taking care of our families, and so we don't want anybody to upset the apple cart, so to speak. So they're not happy. But here's the good thing. They couldn't do anything because all the people were spellbound by what they heard. The people themselves, the ordinary folks who had heard about Jesus, they're there for the holiday or the area around the holiday, and they are soaking it up. They're very, very happy to hear what Jesus is teaching. And so at this point in the story, these leaders, they can't do anything because he's so popular. I could tell you about how that works in the real world, but I'm already over time. So, what can we learn? Don't everybody jump at once. Microphones are ready. I'm not afraid of silence. You want to talk about the Filioque clause? Okay, here we go, Shannon.
I'm not a fan of silence. Also, that's real loud. I'm going to go all the way over here. So it just reminds me, I really can't talk with that. It reminds me of this one kids show that my kids have been watching, produced by Angel Studios. Anyways, it's called Wingfeather Saga, and it's made by Christians. And they just got to this episode. I'm going to ruin it for all of you. They just got to this episode where they realized that the people that have been oppressing them are actually their own people, and they're being turned into these monsters, and that's the people that are like beating them down and trying to control them. And that's what it reminds me of, is like, just because someone claims to be a Christian, you got to worry about the wolf in sheep's clothing.
Absolutely agree. Don't believe everything you hear on the radio. You'll be next.
I think this goes back to your relationship with God. Are you studying? Are you reading? Are you praying? Do you understand? Or are you just listening to what everybody says and what everybody's doing and taking that as what it is and not praying about things? And there's a lot going on. And it's interesting too, if you look at history, the leaders are making the choices. Everybody gets affected by what those choices are.
In the government and in the family.
Right. It affects everybody, and the impact is always great on them. And it's not you blame the government, but in this country, we have a say in our government. And if you aren't doing what's right,
We have
by
more
God,
than a say. We elect our government, so therefore it's our
exactly.
fault.
So, we have a responsibility. And if it's not us, it'll be our children or grandchildren that will.
Which
bear
Jesus
front of it.
mentioned.
Right.
Even your kids.
Yep.
Thank you. Over here, Janice.
I was impressed with the 3 words that split 2 big churches, the East and the West. And
Split one church. It was all one at that
it
time.
all became one. It reminded me that one harsh word can split a friendship or a loved one, and so we have to be careful with our words.
I think you need to listen to a different radio station.
I'm not listening to any radio station. They all drive me crazy.
Personally, I think it's very important. You always have to analyze what you're listening to, no matter what it is, and put it in that biblical eyeglass, whatever. Because I found a lot of good things on Christian radio. So
I don't mean to say that there isn't any good, but there's some maddening things being taught. The number one thing that is being taught that is absolutely false is that you can do whatever you want and God will accept you. That's not true.
It's funny that some people, especially with our government, Reagan once said, he said, the scariest thing you can say in the American language is, we're from the government and we're here to help. You shouldn't ever take everything as face value, like you said. You should be doing your research and making sure that you can trust the people that are saying that they're here to help you. Like Shannon said, you can be oppressed and led to believe that what they're doing is right for you, but you have to look at the biblical scriptures and actually analyze them and make the right decision that God set for us.
Anyone else? Sometimes the tables need to be turned over. And it takes somebody with a real chutzpah to do it. And Jesus was not a mealy-mouthed little preacher. He really wasn't. He was very stern, and he really would come down on false religion, false teaching. Everything that he argued with the Pharisees and the Sadducees was about what is truth. What is the truth about the Sabbath? Does it really mean that you can't grind seeds in your hand and eat? Is that what the Sabbath is about? No, the Sabbath was made for man. And so everything that he argued with them about was, what is the correct interpretation of Scripture? And of course, when we have a generational power situation in the priesthood of the Israelites, you know, those people, if you look at history, they weren't even really the descendants of Aaron like they were supposed to be. At points, the political appointments were made, and then it followed along that line. So anyway, that's in the Bible. I don't know how much value it is in the 21st century. Just if you understand that Jesus was a strong-willed and very smart man, that's good. If you learn that you can't always tell based on the homeostasis what is the right thing. I mean, we would be pretty upset if somebody came in here and tore our offering thing off the wall and dumped all our money out and said, you shouldn't be taking offerings. It's not that they shouldn't have taken offerings. They should have taken offerings, but they shouldn't have been selling stuff. And so that's what he was against. All right. God bless you. Just remember, next week, please plan on staying for a short service after church. God bless. We'll see you.